The blood? His blood splattered on my face when my father finally managed to control him. But it was too late for my mother. Too late for all of us. Good morning, my dear ones. My name is Janet, but everyone here calls me Grandma Jan. I'm 73 years old and was born in Atlanta, Georgia. But I've been living in Chicago for over 50 years now. Today, I'm going to tell you a story I've kept inside me for almost 60 years. A story that many in my family don't even know properly, because the pain was so great that words refused to come out of my mouth. If you're watching this video, please leave a like and subscribe. This old lady here appreciates it from the bottom of her heart. Tell me in the comments what part of America you're watching me from. Sometimes I imagine how my words reach places I've never set foot in, and that warms my heart in a way I can't even explain. I also want to ask you to comment on how many beloved children you have. I'd be very grateful to know. Let's start from the beginning, when I was just 14 years old in 1965. We were a simple but happy family. My father, Walter, was a police officer, a man as straight as an arrow. One of those who wouldn't accept even a free cup of coffee while on duty, you know? A cop has to set an example, John, he always said, adjusting that impeccable uniform before leaving. My mother, Mary, was an elementary school teacher. A woman of strength who woke up at 5 in the morning to have coffee ready, his lunch prepared, and still arrived punctually at the little school where she taught children. Our house was modest, in Lincoln Park, which back then was almost suburban Chicago. We had a large backyard with apple trees, cherry trees, and a lemon tree that my father cared for as if it were a child. And speaking of children, there was just me, an only child for a long time. Dad and Mom tried to have more children, but after 3 miscarriages, the doctors said it was risky for my mother's health to try again. I grew up being the center of their attention, but without being spoiled. Privilege brings responsibility, Mom always said when I complained about having to help with household chores. I studied at the same school where my mother taught, which was torture for a teenager. Imagine, I couldn't do anything wrong without her finding out right away. Our weekends were simple. On Saturdays, we went to the farmer's market to buy things for the week, then stopped by my paternal grandmother's house, who lived downtown. On Sundays, after church, it was spaghetti day and receiving my father's friends, almost all police officers too, with their families. It was a common life, without luxuries, but full of security and love. Everything changed that winter of 1965. I remember it like it was yesterday, the cutting wind of July in Chicago. Wait, that's not right. The cutting wind of January in Chicago, that cold that penetrates to your bones. My father came home later than usual, with a different expression. It wasn't tiredness, it was emotion. He, who had always been a man of few words, that night couldn't stop talking during dinner. "Mary Jan, I met a boy today who broke my heart," he began, stirring the bean and vegetable soup that Mom had prepared. It was during a call in the South Side. His mother, a drug user, was arrested for trafficking. Nobody knows who the father is. The boy was there, thin, scared, with nowhere to go. Mom listened attentively, as she always did. She deeply respected my father's work, despite all the danger involved. "He's 16 years old, Mary. His name is Bernard. An educated young man. Despite everything he's been through, he could be in crime like so many others from that neighborhood, but he studies, has organized notebooks, good grades." That's when I saw in my father's eyes something I had never seen before. A different determination, almost a plea. He's going to a state shelter, but you know how those places are. They barely have resources for small children, let alone a teenager. My mother placed her hand over his as if she already knew what was coming next, and it came. "I was thinking, Mary, we have space, we have the means. Jan always wanted a brother." I remember the silence that followed. A heavy silence, full of possibilities. Mom looked at my father, then at me, then back at him. "Walter, are you talking about adoption?" He nodded, those blue eyes shining in a way I rarely saw. "He can stay in the back room, the one that was your mother's. He's almost a man, won't be any trouble like a small child would. And believe me, this boy is special. I felt it." That night, the conversation extended until late. I stayed there, somewhat forgotten at the table, while they discussed the pros and cons. My mother had her reservations. After all, taking in an unknown teenager isn't a decision you make overnight. But my father was determined in a way I had never seen. Mary, I can't explain it. I looked at this boy and saw something. I saw a chance to make a real difference in someone's life, to give a family to someone who never had one. My mother, who had a soft heart despite her tough teacher appearance, eventually gave in. Let's meet him first, Walter. Let's take it slow. The following week, my father got permission to bring Bernard for lunch at our house. I remember peeking through the window, curious to see what this possible new brother would be like. When my father's car parked, first he got out, then a thin young man with well-cut brown hair, wearing a clean but visibly faded t-shirt and worn jeans. Bernard entered our house like someone entering a museum, looking at everything with reverence, almost afraid to touch anything. He had large, somewhat sad brown eyes and a shy smile that appeared rarely. He spoke little, always very polite, calling my parents sir and ma'am, and me, young lady. You can call me John, I said, trying to break the ice. Everyone calls me that. He nodded, still not looking directly at me. Thank you, Jan. Lunch was somewhat uncomfortable at first. Bernard ate slowly, small portions, as if he were afraid the food would run out or someone would take his plate away. My mother, with her maternal instinct, soon noticed. There's plenty of food, son. You can have seconds, she said, with that sweet voice she used with her shyest students. It was the first time I saw Bernard truly smile. A smile that completely transformed his face, which suddenly seemed much younger, almost childlike. You cook very well, Mrs. Mary, he said, finally allowing himself to look directly at my mother. I saw the look my parents exchanged at that moment. I know now, looking back, that's where the decision was really made. In the following weeks, Bernard came more often. He'd stay for dinner, help my father water the backyard plants, ask about my studies. With each visit, he seemed to loosen up a little more. He told us his biological mother would leave him alone for days, that often he had nothing to eat, that he learned to fend for himself from a young age. He said his dream was to be a mechanic, that he liked taking things apart and putting them back together to understand how they worked. Do you really think I can, Mr. Walter? Be a mechanic someday? He asked once, with such genuine hope in his voice that even I, with my teenage skepticism, was moved. Of course you can, son. With dedication, you can be whatever you want, my father responded, placing his hand on Bernard's shoulder. The boy went rigid for a second, as if he weren't used to touch, but soon relaxed. My mother was the last to be totally convinced. Not out of malice, but out of caution. She observed more than she spoke. I noticed how her eyes followed Bernard when he didn't notice, how she asked apparently casual questions to get to know him better. One night, when Bernard had already left, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. He's a good boy, Mary. He's had a difficult life, but kept his kindness. That's rare. I know, Walter. I'm just afraid we won't be what he needs. What if we can't handle it? What if he needs more help than we can offer? We'll take it one day at a time. But that boy needs a family, and we can be that family. 3 months after that first lunch, in October 1965, Bernard officially moved into our house. The bureaucracy wasn't as complicated as it could have been. My father knew people in the system, and Bernard's biological mother signed all the custody papers without hesitation, eager to get rid of what she considered a burden. We set up the back room, the one that had been my grandmother's before she passed away. We painted the walls light blue, put in a new bed, a desk for studying, a bookshelf for the few belongings he had. My mother bought new clothes, school supplies, even a small radio he could listen to in his free time. On the day he came to stay for good, my mother made a chocolate cake with the phrase, "Welcome to the family, Bernard," written in colorful sprinkles. He looked at it, and for the first time since we'd known him, cried. He didn't hide his face or try to disguise it, just let the tears roll while thanking us repeatedly. Nobody ever did something like this for me, he said between sobs. My mother hugged him, and for the first time, he returned the hug without hesitation. My father, who wasn't a man to show emotions easily, discreetly wiped away a tear. The adaptation wasn't immediate or perfect, of course. Bernard had strange habits. Sometimes he'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night from nightmares. He'd hide food in his room, as if he feared that one day it would run out. He had difficulty accepting gifts or any form of kindness without thinking he needed to immediately reciprocate. But gradually, the boy began to feel safer, more at home. We enrolled him in the same school where I studied and where my mother taught. At first, the other students whispered, asked indiscreet questions about where he came from, why he was living with us. Bernard responded politely, but without giving many details. "I'm Jean's brother now," was all he'd say, with a simplicity that disarmed even the most curious. At home, he made an effort to fit into our routine. He'd wake up early, make his bed meticulously, offer to help with all tasks. My mother had to insist that he also rest, that he understand he didn't need to pay for being there. "Son, you don't need to do all this. This is your home now, not a place where you work in exchange for shelter," she explained patiently. "It's hard to get used to, Mrs. Mary," he'd respond, lowering his eyes. "I always had to do something in exchange for anything. Nothing was free." My father found a mechanic shop near home where Bernard could help on Saturday mornings. The owner, Mr. Tony, was an old friend of my father's and agreed to teach the basics to the young man. Bernard would return from these mornings with hands dirty from grease, but with a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes that was beautiful to see. "Mr. Tony said I have a knack for it," he'd tell us excitedly during Saturday lunch. Today, I managed to take apart and put back together a carburetor by myself. On Sunday nights, when we received my father's friends for the traditional spaghetti, Bernard initially stayed withdrawn, almost hidden. Over time, he began to participate more, even telling some stories that made everyone laugh. My father's colleagues treated him as part of the family, which clearly meant a lot to him. With me, the relationship took a little longer to develop. I, with my 14 years and all the insecurity of adolescence, didn't know exactly how to act with this new brother who had appeared out of nowhere. Sometimes I'd pick on him, test the limits, want to see how far his patience went. Bernard never fought back, just smiled that sad smile and said, "It's okay, Jan, no problem." It was on a rainy afternoon, one of those typical Chicago days, that our relationship began to change. I had a math test the next day and was having trouble with equations. Frustrated, I threw my notebook away and started crying with anger. Bernard, who was passing through the hallway, stopped at my bedroom door. "Can I help? Math was always my favorite subject," he offered timidly. Reluctantly, I let him sit beside me. To my surprise, Bernard explained in a much clearer way than the teacher. He had patience, used everyday examples, didn't get angry when I didn't understand right away. "See? You can do it, Jan. It's just a matter of seeing the problem from another angle," he'd say, with a gentleness that completely disarmed me. After that day, I began to see Bernard with different eyes. He was no longer the intruder in my family, but someone who had his own value, his own qualities. I began to include him when I went out with friends, to defend him when someone at school made nasty comments, to really treat him like a brother. 6 months after his arrival, the change in our house was evident. Bernard smiled more, spoke louder, occupied his space without apologizing for existing. My parents were radiant with his progress, proud of how he was developing at school, at the shop, at home. "Best decision we ever made," my father commented one night, watching through the window as Bernard helped my mother pick lemons from the tree. "That boy deserved a chance, and look how he took advantage of it." If someone had asked me at that moment if I was happy with my new brother, I would have answered yes without hesitation. Bernard seemed to be exactly what my family needed to be complete. A son for my parents, a brother for me, someone who brought new and positive energy to our house. How could I imagine that behind that shy smile, those sad eyes, that apparently sincere gratitude, something much darker was hiding? How could I know that that decision, made with so much love by my father, would end up destroying our family in a way none of us could predict? At that time, I only saw the brother I had always wanted. I didn't see the small signs, the strange behaviors that, looking back now, were like red flags waving furiously, warning of a danger we didn't know how to recognize in time. The first months with Bernard were like a dream that, very soon, would transform into the worst nightmare of our lives. Have you ever noticed how we always ignore that little voice inside our head that says something isn't right? That's how it was with me. The signs were all there, blinking like a broken traffic light, but I chose not to see them. Maybe out of naivety, maybe because I didn't want to disappoint my parents, maybe out of fear of being unfair to someone who had suffered so much. It was at the beginning of 1966, about 3 months after Bernard officially moved into our house, that I began to notice small changes. Nothing glaring at first, just oddities. Details that seemed out of place, like a picture on the wall that someone moved an inch and only those who know the house well notice. The first thing I noticed was how he looked at my mother when he thought no one was watching. It wasn't a son's look at his mother, nor one of gratitude. It was something more possessive, as if he were planning something. When she passed by him in the kitchen and touched his shoulder affectionately, something in his eyes changed for a second. A flash of something that at the time I couldn't identify, but today, looking back, I recognize as contained anger. One morning, I woke up earlier than usual and went to the kitchen to drink water. I stopped at the door when I heard low voices. Bernard and my mother. She was preparing coffee, as she always did around 5 in the morning, and he had gotten up early to help. "You didn't need to wake up so early, son," my mother said with that sweet voice of hers. "I like being alone with you, ma'am," he responded in a tone that gave me chills. "Mr. Walter and Jan don't understand you like I understand you." My mother laughed, that polite laugh she gave when she didn't quite know how to respond to something. "That's silly, Bernard. We're a family. Before I had nothing," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Now I have you." It was the way he said it, not "now I have you all," or "now I have a family." It was specific. "Now I have you," as if my mother were a thing that belonged to him. When I entered the kitchen, Bernard changed completely. He went back to being the polite and smiling boy, offering to serve me a glass of milk, asking if I had slept well. But I caught his look before the transformation, irritated that I had interrupted the moment. I mentioned these small perceptions to my best friend, Susan. "You're jealous, Jan," she said, laughing. "It's normal when a new sibling arrives." Maybe that was it. Maybe they were just silly teenage jealousy. I decided to try to be better, to make more effort to accept Bernard completely. But the strange things continued happening. My mother began to notice that some of her personal objects were disappearing. A lipstick, a scarf, an old photo where she appeared alone. Small things that could easily be justified as lost around the house. When she mentioned these disappearances at dinner, Bernard was always the first to offer to help look, always the most worried. "How strange, Mrs. Mary," he'd say with apparent concern. "Are you sure you didn't leave it at school?" One afternoon I came home earlier from school because I had felt sick during gym class. No one expected me to arrive at that hour. Mom was at school, Dad at work, and Bernard should be at the shop since it was his learning day there. But when I entered the house, silently because of my headache, I heard noise in my parents' room. I thought it was burglars and froze with fear. Then, very slowly, I peeked through the half-open door. It was Bernard. He was lying on my parents' bed, hugging my mother's pillow, with his face buried in it, breathing deeply as if he wanted to absorb her scent. Beside him, spread on the bed, were several objects I recognized as the lost ones. The lipstick, the scarf, some photos, even a hairbrush. I stepped back before he could see me, my heart beating so hard I thought he might hear it. I left the house quietly and went to Susan's house, making up that I had felt sick on the street, not at home. That night I couldn't sleep. I wanted to tell my parents, but what would I say? I caught Bernard smelling Mom's pillow? It sounded ridiculous even to me. And if it really was just jealousy, as Susan had suggested, and if I was seeing problems where they didn't exist because I didn't want to share my parents, I decided to observe more before saying anything. I began to pay attention to every detail of Bernard's behavior, especially when he didn't know he was being observed. That's when I realized how much he changed depending on who was around. With my father, he was the perfect son, respectful, hard-working, interested in work stories from the police. With my mother, he was needy, almost childish sometimes, always seeking approval and physical affection, a touch on the arm, a hug, a caress. With me, he alternated between the protective older brother and long hours completely ignoring me, as if I were invisible. But there were moments, Small instance when the mask slipped. Like when my father corrected him in front of a neighbor about how to hold a tool. I saw his face contract in an expression of pure hatred before quickly smiling and thanking him for the correction. Or when my mother mentioned, proudly, that I had gotten the highest grade in the class in English, Bernard broke the pencil he was holding in two, hiding the gesture under the table. Things began to disappear or break around the house. My father's antique wristwatch, inherited from my grandfather. A set of dishes my mother had received as a wedding gift. My diary, which I kept hidden under my mattress. When questioned about anything, Bernard always had a perfect alibi, was always somewhere else, always had a reasonable explanation. One day I found my cat, Romeo, dead in the backyard. He was only 2 years old and healthy. I cried inconsolably while my father buried him under the apple tree. Bernard was beside me, consoling me, saying the cat had probably eaten something poisoned on the street. "Cats are like that, John," he said, putting his arm over my shoulders. "You never know where they go, what they eat. Don't get too attached to animals, they'll always leave and abandon you." Something in his tone deeply bothered me. I looked into his eyes and for an instant saw something cold, almost amused, as if he were enjoying my pain. I pushed the thought away. It would be too absurd. The situation with my mother gradually worsened. Bernard began to create small conflicts between her and my father. He'd tell slightly different stories to each about what the other had said or done. Nothing obvious or aggressive, just small distortions that over time created distrust. "Mrs. Mary, Mr. Walter commented at coffee that you've been very tired, that you should drop some classes. He thinks you can't handle it." Or, "Mr. Walter, Mrs. Mary said she gets upset when you arrive late without notice. She thinks you don't care about the family." My parents, who rarely argued before, began to have small disagreements. Nothing serious, but enough to create a tension that didn't exist before. And Bernard was always there, being the peacemaker, the understanding one, the one who understood both sides. "Mrs. Mary, you work too much. It's normal for Mr. Walter to worry." "Mr. Walter, Mrs. Mary only worries because she loves you." He created the problem and then presented himself as the solution. It was like a macabre dance that only I seemed to see. In the middle of this whirlwind, something happened that made me even more alert. Clara, my 15-year-old cousin who lived in Milwaukee, came to spend a week with us during July vacation. She was beautiful. Blonde hair, green eyes, the type of girl who makes boys turn their heads on the street. Bernard was immediately fascinated by her. At first, I thought it was just a 17-year-old boy enchanted by a pretty girl. It was normal, right? But there was something more intense, more disturbing in the way he observed her. As if she were prey, Clara noticed and began to avoid being alone with him. When I asked what was happening, she hesitated, seeming embarrassed. "Jan, your brother is kind of strange, isn't he? He follows me around the house. He watches me when he thinks I'm not looking. Last night, I woke up and he was standing at the guest room door, just watching me sleep. I felt a chill in my stomach. Did you tell Aunt Mary or Uncle Walter?" She shook her head. "I don't want to cause problems. He didn't do anything, just makes me uncomfortable. Like he wanted something from me." The next day, Clara said she had received an urgent phone call and needed to go home earlier. My parents found it strange, but didn't question much. Bernard seemed irritated by her sudden departure, although he tried to disguise it. That night, I heard noises coming from his room. Rhythmic sounds, as if he were hitting something repeatedly. The next day, I noticed his knuckles were red and scraped, as if he had punched a wall. The strange behavior only worsened after that. Bernard began to treat me with a mixture of disdain and veiled threat. When we were alone, sometimes he'd get too close, invading my personal space. "Your cousin is a liar," he whispered once, cornering me in the hallway. "She made up things about me, didn't she?" "What did she say?" I felt fear for the first time. Not a vague and distant fear, but real, physical terror. There was something in his eyes that was no longer human. It was like looking at a predator. She didn't say anything. I managed to respond, my voice trembling. "She just had to go back because of her sick grandmother." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Because if someone starts telling lies about me, Jan, I'm going to be very sad. And when I get sad, I do things I regret later. It was a clear threat. I swallowed hard and nodded, trying to seem calm. When he finally moved away, I ran to the bathroom and vomited, overcome by a terror I couldn't explain. I decided I needed to talk to my parents, no matter if it seemed crazy. I chose my father first. He was a police officer, trained to notice when something wasn't right. I waited for a moment when we were alone. A Sunday afternoon when my mother had gone to visit a sick friend and Bernard was supposedly at the library studying for a test. "Dad," I began, my voice more trembling than I'd like. "I need to tell you something about Bernard." My father lowered the newspaper he was reading and looked at me with attention. "What is it, daughter?" I told him everything. What I had seen in their room, the missing objects, how he looked at my mother, the incident with Clara, the veiled threats. While I spoke, I saw my father's face changing, first with surprise, then with concern, finally with something between disbelief and sadness. When I finished, we sat in silence for a long moment. My father sighed deeply. "Jan, are you sure you're not misinterpreting things? Bernard had a very difficult life. It's natural that he has some strange behavior sometimes." I felt as if I had been slapped. My own father didn't believe me. "Dad, it's not just strange behavior. There's something wrong with him, something serious. He looks at Mom in a way that gives me chills. And the way he spoke to me in the hallway. He threatened me." My father rubbed his face, suddenly seeming older and more tired. "Daughter, Bernard is still adapting. Was it his idea in your head? The idea of adopting a young man was mine. I know it's not easy for you to share our attention after so many years being an only child." It was as if the ground had disappeared under my feet. My father thought I was making it all up out of jealousy. Or worse, that Bernard was right about me. "You think I'm lying?" I asked, my voice choked. "No, daughter, that's not it. I just think maybe you're seeing problems where they don't exist. We're all adjusting to this new family dynamic." At that moment, I heard the front door opening. Bernard entered, carrying some books. When he saw us in the living room, he stopped, looking from me to my father and back to me. Something in my face or my father's posture must have betrayed the topic of our conversation, because I saw something darken in his look. "Good afternoon, Mr. Walter." "Hi, Jan," he said, with that perfect smile I now knew was completely false. "Am I interrupting something?" "No, son. I was just talking with Jan about family things," my father responded, getting up. "How was studying?" "Productive," Bernard responded, still staring at me. "I learned many new things today." When my father left the room to get water, Bernard approached me. His voice was just a whisper, but every word was clear as crystal. "I already warned you once, little Janet. Don't test my patience. You won't like to see what happens when I get really irritated." I stepped back, feeling my blood freeze. It was no longer just intuition or paranoia. There was something deeply wrong with Bernard, something dangerous, and nobody but me seemed capable of seeing it. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time, and in the days that followed, I began to realize that something terrible was forming in our house. Like storm clouds accumulating on the horizon, announcing a disaster from which we couldn't escape. The worst was yet to come, and when it finally arrived, it destroyed everything I loved in ways none of us could have imagined. Sometimes I wonder if there are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. For me, it was November 17th, 1966. A Thursday that began like any other, but ended as the day that destroyed our family forever. The week had been tense. After my conversation with my father, Bernard intensified his surveillance over me. He no longer disguised it when we were alone. The gentle smile and sad eyes gave way to a cold, calculating look that followed me around the house like a predator tracking its prey. Mom was more tired than usual that week. The school where she taught was having problems. Lack of teachers, unruly children, parent meetings that extended until late. She came home exhausted, shoulders drooping, those kind eyes now always red with fatigue. That Thursday, I woke up with a weight in my chest, a feeling that something bad was about to happen. You know that inexplicable anguish, as if the air were too heavy to breathe? I tried to convince Mom to stay home, made up that I was feeling sick, that I needed her nearby. But there was an important meeting at school. "I promise to come home earlier today, my love," she said, kissing my forehead. "We can watch that movie you like so much after dinner." I watched through the window as she walked away, a small and determined figure walking toward the bus stop. I didn't know it would be the last time I'd see her alive. School was dismissed early that day, something about a teacher's assembly. I arrived home around 2 in the afternoon, expecting to find the house empty. Dad was at work, Mom at school, and Bernard should be at the shop, like every Thursday. But when I opened the door, I immediately felt something was wrong. First, the silence. Not the normal silence of an empty house, but a heavy, oppressive silence, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Then, the smell. Light. Metallic. At the time, I didn't recognize it, but today I know. It was the smell of blood. "Is anyone home?" I called, my voice small in the silence. No answer. I left my backpack on the couch and walked slowly down the hallway. The door to my parents' room was ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the dark corridor. I pushed it slowly, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would burst my ribs. What I saw in that room will haunt me until the day I close my eyes for the last time. My mother was on their bed. She wore the light blue dress she loved so much, now stained with dark red. Her face, always so expressive, so full of life, was frozen in an expression of horror and surprise. Her eyes open, glassy, looking at the ceiling without seeing. Her throat. Oh my God, her throat had a deep cut from ear to ear, as if someone had tried to decapitate her. And beside the bed, sitting in a chair, observing her with an almost dreamy expression, was Bernard. His bloodied hands rested in his lap. Beside him, on the floor, a kitchen knife, the same one Mom used to cut meat on Sundays. He didn't notice my presence immediately. He was lost in some kind of trance, looking at my mother's body as if admiring a work of art he had created himself. A sound escaped from my throat, not a scream nor a cry, but an animalistic, primitive noise of pure horror. That's what made Bernard turn his head in my direction. "Ah, Jan," he said, as if we were meeting at breakfast. "You came home early today." I couldn't respond. My eyes went from my dead mother to Bernard and back, unable to process what they were seeing. "She came home early too," he continued, casually pointing to the body. "Said she wasn't feeling well, wanted to rest a bit before preparing dinner." A strange smile appeared on his face. "I think now she'll rest forever." Finally, I found my voice. "What did you do?" The words came out strangled, almost inaudible. Bernard tilted his head to the side, like a curious dog. "What does it look like I did, little Janet? I freed us all." "Freed?" I repeated, unable to understand. "She was getting in the way," he explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "She stood between me and your father, between me and you. She was possessive, controlling. Didn't you notice how she suffocated us all with that false love? It was like hearing someone speak in a foreign language. I could distinguish the words, but they didn't make sense together. 'You killed my mother,' I said, and saying it out loud made everything terribly real. 'You killed my mother!' The scream seemed to awaken something in Bernard. The dreamy expression disappeared, replaced by that cold and predatory look I had seen only in glimpses before. "And now I'll have to kill you too," he said, standing up slowly. "It's a shame. I liked you, Jan. We could have been a happy family, me, you, and your father. But you never gave me a chance, did you? Always suspicious, always watching me. Like a little spy, I grabbed the knife. I don't remember moving, bending down to pick it up from the floor. In one instant, I was paralyzed at the door. In the next, the knife was in my hand, heavy and slippery with my mother's blood. "Stay away from me," I warned, my voice firmer than expected. "Don't come any closer." Bernard laughed, a guttural, sick laugh that didn't match his young face. "Or what, little Janet? Are you going to kill me too? You don't have the courage. You were always Mommy's little darling, the protected little doll." He took a step forward. "Stop!" I screamed, raising the knife. Another step. "I'm warning you, Bernard." One more step. Now he was close enough for me to smell him, a mixture of sweat, blood, and something else, something chemical I didn't recognize at the time, but later discovered was cocaine. His eyes were dilated, feverish. "You're just like your mother," he whispered. "Weak, pathetic. You think you can stop me with that knife?" I just cut her throat and didn't even blink. What do you think I'll feel when it's your turn? Something inside me broke. I can't explain. It was as if a dam burst, and all the anger, all the fear, all the horror of that moment flooded my body. I lunged with the knife not out of self-defense or calculation, but out of pure animal instinct. The blade entered his stomach with frightening ease, like cutting soft butter. Bernard looked down, surprised, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Then his eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in them. He began, but didn't finish the sentence. He staggered backward, pulling the knife from my hand when he fell to the floor. Blood began to spread rapidly across the floorboards, mixing with my mother's. I stood there, paralyzed again, looking at my bloodied hands, at my mother's body on the bed, at Bernard writhing on the floor. I don't know how much time passed. Seconds, minutes, hours maybe. Time had lost all meaning. I only returned to reality when I heard the front door opening, my father's voice calling cheerfully, "I'm home! I managed to get out early today." What happened next was etched in my memory as a series of disconnected flashes, frozen images in time. My father appearing in the bedroom doorway, the smile dying on his lips when he saw the scene. Bernard, still alive, stretching a trembling hand toward him. "Dad." She stabbed me. "Help." Me covered in blood, unable to explain, unable to do anything but point to my mother's body. He killed her, Dad. He killed Mom. My father, falling to his knees between the two of us, his face contorted in an indescribable mask of pain. Bernard, suddenly gaining strength, pulling a small pistol from under the mattress, my father's backup weapon, which he kept for emergencies. The deafening sound of the shot when my father, realizing Bernard's intention, threw himself on him. The bullet that missed my father by inches and lodged in the wall. The desperate fight between the two, my father trying to wrestle the gun from Bernard's hands, Bernard using his last strength to try to shoot again. And finally, the moment when my father, trained police officer, managed to turn the gun toward Bernard. Another shot. Silence. Bernard's body, finally motionless, eyes open, fixed on the ceiling, exactly like my mother's. My father, breathing heavily, dropping the gun as if it burned his hands. The two of us, sitting on the floor of that room, transformed into a slaughterhouse, unable to speak, to cry, to do anything but look at the two bodies and the blood that seemed to be everywhere. That's how the police found us an hour later, when a neighbor, having heard the shots, finally worked up the courage to call the station. What followed was a blur of uniforms, questions, camera flashes, yellow tape isolating our house. I remember being wrapped in a blanket, despite the heat, because I couldn't stop shaking. I remember the pitying looks of the police officers, my father's colleagues, when they took us to the station. The following weeks were a nightmare of statements, funerals, sensationalist newspaper headlines, family tragedy. Adopted teenager kills mother and is killed by police father. The investigation revealed things about Bernard that none of us knew. He wasn't the innocent orphan my father believed he had rescued. His mother wasn't in prison for trafficking. She had been murdered 3 years earlier, with strong suspicions that her own son was the culprit, although they were never able to prove it. Bernard had been through 5 adoptive families before us. All returned him to the system alleging disturbing behavior, from animal torture to attempted sexual assault on younger children. All of this was in records that, for some reason, incompetence or corruption, never reached my father when he initiated the adoption process. They found in his room a diary detailing violent fantasies involving my mother. And even more disturbing, plans to kill my father and make it look like suicide, then convince me to run away with him to another state. The investigation concluded that both my father and I had acted in self-defense. There were no formal charges, but the damage was already done. Our family had been destroyed. Our house, once full of love and security, was now stained with blood that no amount of cleaning could remove. We sold the house a few weeks later. Neither of us could even look at it without reliving that day. We moved to a small apartment on the other side of town, trying to start over, trying to find a path through the horror that had become our reality. But how do you start over when your entire world has crumbled? How do you move forward when the person you loved most was brutally torn from your life? How do you trust again when your father's trust in someone resulted in such disaster? That's the question that tormented me in the months and years that followed. A question for which I had no answer, at least not yet. What I didn't know at that terrible moment, while looking at the blood on my hands, my mother's blood, Bernard's blood, was that this was just the beginning of our ordeal, that the worst was yet to come, in the form of my father's crushing silence, in the weight of guilt that consumed him day after day, in the depression that gradually pushed him away from me, the only family he had left. And I, a 15-year-old girl who had just seen her mother murdered and been forced to stab someone to survive, how could I know that I would need to find strength I never imagined having, not only to keep living, but to save my father from the abyss of despair into which he was sinking? Life as we knew it had ended in that bloodied room, and the path ahead was darker and lonelier than anything we could imagine. Silence has a weight, you know. After that day, the silence in our new apartment was so heavy that sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, suffocating, as if it had transformed into something physical, pressing my chest until I couldn't breathe. The first weeks after Mom's funeral were of pure numbness. It was as if we were moving underwater, slow, disoriented, unable to hear or feel completely. Dad arranged a leave from work, and I missed school for almost a month. Nobody questioned it. The story had come out in all the local newspapers. "The Santos family tragedy," the headlines proclaimed, with photos of us taken from family albums that someone, some acquaintance, some neighbor, had sold to the press. Our small apartment in Lincoln Park, distant from our old house, was supposed to be a new beginning. But how do you start over when your life has been so violently torn apart? In the first days, we barely spoke to each other. Not out of anger or resentment, but because words seemed totally inadequate in the face of what we had lived through. At night, I heard my father crying in the room next door. A contained cry, muffled by the pillow, as if even in his pain he tried not to bother me. In the morning he prepared our coffee in silence, eyes swollen and red, but always trying to smile when he saw me. A smile that never reached his eyes, that only highlighted even more the devastation on his face. "How are you today, daughter?" he'd ask, the same question every morning, like a ritual. "I'm fine, Dad," I'd respond, the same lie every day. We weren't fine. We were shattered, bleeding inside, unable to deal with the monstrosity of what had happened. It was in the third week in our new home that I realized something beyond pain and grief was consuming my father. He began to lose weight rapidly, always claiming not to be hungry when I tried to make him eat. He slept less and less. Many times I'd find him at dawn sitting on the small apartment balcony, staring at nothing, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "You need to sleep a bit, Dad," I'd say. "I can't close my eyes without seeing," he'd begin, but never finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I also saw when I closed my eyes, my mother on the bed, the blood, Bernard, the knife, the shot. A horror movie that repeated endlessly. One morning, when I entered the kitchen, I found my father sitting at the table surrounded by papers, police reports, adoption documents, photos of a younger Bernard, old newspaper articles. He had his eyes fixed, glazed, on the pages before him. "What is this, Dad?" I asked, although I already knew. "I should have seen it, Jan," he responded, his voice hoarse from someone who hadn't spoken for hours. "It's all here, all the signs, his history, the warnings. How could I have been so blind?" I sat beside him, looking at the scattered documents. There were psychologists' reports describing Bernard as potentially dangerous, incapable of empathy, prone to manipulative behaviors. There were incident records from previous homes. A younger child pushed downstairs, a dog found dead, stolen objects, small fires. "It wasn't your fault," I said, holding my father's cold hand. "You didn't know. Nobody showed you these documents." "I'm a police officer, John," he said, pulling his hand back. "My job is to investigate, discover the truth. And I didn't even investigate the boy I brought into my house, near my family." Guilt began to consume him like a disease. Day after day, I watched my father disappear inside himself. When he finally returned to work, after 6 weeks of leave, he was just a shadow of the man he had been. The other officers treated him with a mixture of pity and discomfort. He, who had always been respected for his integrity and competence, was now seen as a walking tragedy. I returned to school too, although I had begged to change to another one. I couldn't stand the looks, the whispers when I passed by. Some friends tried to approach, but I no longer knew how to be normal, how to talk about common teenage things when I had seen and done things no one my age should experience. Susan, my best friend, was the only one who persisted. She came to the apartment almost every day after class, even when I barely spoke. She'd sit with me in silence, sometimes just holding my hand, other times telling school gossip as if nothing had happened. Her presence was like a thin thread connecting me to the world that existed before the tragedy. As the months passed, a somber routine was established. Dad worked long hours, arriving home late, often smelling of alcohol. I took care of the house the best I could, cooked the basics I had learned from Mom, tried to keep my grades up at school. We spoke less and less. It was a year after Mom's death that the situation hit rock bottom. I had just turned 16, a date that passed almost unnoticed, with only a small cake bought by Susan and an awkward hug from my father. He seemed worse every day, thinner, more distant, with deep dark circles and an empty expression that scared me. That night, I came home from school and found the apartment dark and silent. I called for him, but got no response. A feeling of panic began to grow in my chest as I checked the empty rooms. When I got to the bathroom and the door was locked, panic turned to terror. "Dad!" I screamed, banging on the door. "Dad, answer me, please!" Silence. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife and returned to force the lock. When the door finally gave way, the scene before me froze my blood. My father in the bathtub, the water reddened, a deep cut on each wrist, his head fallen to the side, eyes closed. For a terrible moment, I thought I had arrived too late. Then I noticed the subtle movement of his chest. He was breathing, albeit weakly. I don't remember exactly what I did next. I know I screamed for help, that I ran to the phone, that I called an ambulance. I know I tried to stop the bleeding with towels, that I repeated endlessly, "Don't leave me, Dad. Please don't leave me." The hours at the hospital were the longest of my life. Sitting alone in the waiting room, with clothes still stained with blood, my father's blood this time, I felt I had reached my limit. I was 16 years old and had already seen more death and suffering than many see in a lifetime. I had lost my mother, had taken a life, even if in self-defense, and now was about to lose my father too. When the doctor finally appeared to say he would survive, that we had arrived in time, I collapsed in tears, not of relief, but of total exhaustion. I cried until I had no more tears, until my whole body hurt, until the nurses worried I would need sedation too. My father was hospitalized for 2 weeks, first in the ICU, then in the psychiatric ward. The doctors spoke of severe depression, suicidal ideation, post-traumatic stress disorder. To me, they were just technical words to describe what I already knew. My father was drowning in guilt, and I didn't know how to save him. During those 2 weeks, I stayed at Susan's house. Her parents treated me with affection, trying to give me a glimpse of normalcy. Uncle Charles, Susan's father and my father's childhood friend, visited me every day at the hospital, often staying there when I couldn't because of school. When my father finally was discharged, he came with a bag of medications and a recommendation for therapy twice a week. He was calmer, but still distant, as if a part of him had remained in that bathtub. "I'm sorry, Jan," were his first words when we were alone at home. I wasn't thinking about you. I just wanted the pain to stop." I hugged him, feeling his bones under his skin, so fragile, so different from the strong man I knew. "We'll get through this, Dad," I said, without really believing. "Together. Promise you won't leave me?" He nodded, but couldn't look me in the eyes. I promised to try. The following months were of slow, painful recovery, with frightening ups and downs. Therapy helped, not miraculously, but gradually. The psychiatrist adjusted the medications several times until finding the combination that kept the darkest thoughts under control. My father returned to work, but in administrative service, away from the streets and pressure. We counted on unexpected help from people who until then were just distant acquaintances. The lady from the apartment next door, Mrs. Irene, a 70-year-old widow, began bringing homemade dishes almost daily, insisting we were too thin. The building doorman, Mr. Joe, always found a way to fix small things in the apartment without charging. The English teacher offered to give me extra classes to make up for lost time. Small gestures of kindness that together formed a safety net around us, preventing us from falling again into the abyss. Still, we never went back to being who we were before. How could we? We carried visible and invisible scars that completely reformulated who we were, how we saw the world, how we related to each other and to others. On my 17th birthday, my father made a visible effort to create some normalcy. He bought a cake, invited Susan and 2 more classmates who had gotten close to me, even played a song Mom used to love. In the middle of the small celebration, our eyes met, and I saw in him a mixture of sadness and determination that broke my heart. Later that night, when everyone had already left, he handed me a small package. "It was your mother's," he said. "She wanted you to have it on your 18th birthday, but I think she would want you to have it now." Inside the little box was a gold necklace with a small pendant shaped like an open book, a reference to the love Mom had for reading and tried to instill in me from childhood. She bought it months before everything happened, he continued, his voice choked. I kept it exactly where she had hidden it. Looking at that necklace, something broke inside me, not destructively, but as if a dam finally gave way, releasing emotions I had kept contained for so long. "I miss her so much," I confessed, tears flowing freely. "Every day, Dad. Every day I wake up thinking I'm going to hear her voice around the house." "Me too, daughter," he responded. And for the first time since the tragedy, he cried openly in front of me. Not hidden in the room, not silently, but great sobs that shook his entire body. Not a second passes without me thinking of her, without me regretting. "It wasn't your fault," I said, with all the conviction I could muster. "Dad, look at me. It wasn't your fault. You just wanted to help someone. You just wanted to do good. But I brought the monster into our house, Jan. I insisted, even when your mother had doubts, and he deceived us. Deceived everyone. Even the specialists didn't see what he really was. We stayed there, embraced, crying together for the first time. It was painful, but somehow also purifying, as if together we could finally begin to drain the poison of guilt and resentment that was consuming us from within. That night didn't magically heal everything. My father still had bad days, still fought against depression, still woke up screaming from nightmares. I still had terrible flashbacks, still avoided certain places and situations, still jumped at any sudden noise. But something fundamental had changed. We were no longer suffering separately, each isolated in their pain. We were suffering together, and somehow that made the burden more bearable. In the following months, we established new family rituals, small moments of connection that helped us continue. On Sundays, we made pancakes together, as Mom used to do. On Friday nights, we watched a movie, always something light, nothing with violence or suspense. On Saturdays, we visited the cemetery, bringing fresh flowers to Mom. And gradually, so slowly I barely noticed when it began, we were relearning to live. Not like before, it would never be like before, but in a new way, carrying our scars with more dignity, enjoying the good moments when they came, facing the bad moments together. In my last year of high school, when it came time to decide what I would do with my life, the answer came naturally: psychology. I wanted to understand what had happened to our family. I wanted to help other people going through trauma. I wanted to transform all that pain into something positive. When I told my father, I saw a gleam in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. A glimpse of the man he had been before, of the idealistic police officer who believed in making a difference. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said, holding my hands. "And I am, Jan. So proud it barely fits in my chest." They were simple words, but they meant the world to me. A sign that despite everything, there was still hope for us, that we could not only survive the tragedy, but eventually find a path beyond it. The path would be long, winding, with many obstacles still to come, But at that moment, for the first time since the day that changed everything, I felt that maybe, just maybe, we could find some kind of peace. What I didn't know is that this peace would come in unexpected ways, and that the healing journey would be as transformative as it was painful, that we would need to go even deeper into the well of pain before finally finding the light. Time is strange when you go through a tragedy. Sometimes it seems like everything happened yesterday. I can smell the blood, hear the screams, see my mother's empty eyes. Other times, it seems like it happened in another life, to another person. Today, at 73 years old, looking back, I see that 14-year-old girl who lost everything in one day never would have imagined the life she would end up building from the ashes. I entered the psychology program at University of Illinois at Chicago in 1970 at 19 years old. It was an achievement not just mine, but both of ours, me and my father. He had returned to work full-time, still in the administrative part of the police, and I gave some private tutoring lessons to help with expenses. It wasn't easy, but we were moving forward, one day at a time. The university campus was a world apart from what I knew. For the first time since the tragedy, I was in a place where I wasn't the girl from that family, where people didn't know my story before even meeting me. It was liberating and scary at the same time. I could be whoever I wanted, but I also felt like an imposter, as if I carried a terrible secret that, if discovered, would make everyone turn away. In my second year of college, something happened that would change my life again, but this time for the better. In a seminar on trauma, the professor invited a psychiatrist to speak about his experience treating survivors of extreme situations. Dr. Edward Mendez was about 40 years old, prematurely gray hair, kind eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He spoke with such knowledge and empathy that I stayed after class to ask questions. "You have a particular interest in the subject," he observed after my third question. I hesitated. It was the first time I considered sharing my story with someone from college. "It's personal," I finally responded. He nodded, without pressing. "If you want to talk sometime, I work at the university clinic on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage, but I ended up going." Sitting in that small room with light blue walls, I told everything. About Bernard, about my mother, about my father's suicide attempt, about how I still woke up screaming many nights. I spoke for almost 2 hours without stopping, words flowing like a burst dam. Dr. Edward listened without judging, without that expression of horror or pity I so feared. When I finished, he didn't offer miraculous solutions or cliched consoling phrases. "Janet," he said, and it was the first time someone had called me by my full name in years. "What you lived through is unimaginable for most people. That you're here, studying, functioning, is extraordinary. But true healing doesn't come just from surviving. It comes from integrating trauma into your story without letting it define who you are." Those words opened something inside me. We began formal therapy once a week. It wasn't easy. Many times I left sessions exhausted, drained, as if I had run an emotional marathon. But slowly, I began to see my story from another perspective. "You're not just a victim, Janet," Dr. Edward told me once. "You're a survivor. And more than that, you saved your father. Without you, he wouldn't be alive today." I had never thought of it that way. I always saw myself as the girl who didn't notice the danger in time, who couldn't protect her mother, who was forced to hurt someone to survive. The idea that there was also strength and courage in my actions was revolutionary. I shared these ideas with my father, who now had his own therapist. Gradually, our relationship began to transform. We were no longer just two survivors connected by tragedy, but two people rebuilding a genuine connection, based not only on what we had lost, but on what we still had in each other. It was in therapy that I finally managed to talk about something I had kept for years: the guilt for having killed Bernard. Even knowing it was self-defense, even knowing what he had done, that moment when I stuck the knife in him haunted me. "I took a life," I confessed, hands trembling. "Sometimes I wake up and feel the weight of him falling on the knife, feel the warm blood on my hands." In extreme situations, our brain has only a few options: flee, freeze, or fight, Dr. Edward explained. You weren't thinking rationally at that moment, you were surviving. It wasn't a conscious choice, it was pure instinct. It took me a long time to accept this, to understand that my reaction didn't make me equal to Bernard, that there was an abyss between killing for pleasure, for power, as he did with my mother, and killing to defend yourself when there's no other option. In my 3rd year of college, I began to open up more. I made friends, participated in study groups, even went to some parties. Nothing extravagant, but small moments of normalcy that before seemed impossible. One of these friends was Carlos, a law student whom I met at the library. We started talking about books and ended up talking about everything. On our 4th meeting at a cafe near the university, he took my hand across the table. "Can I tell you a secret, Jan?" he said, using the nickname few use now. "I know who you are. I've known since the first day." My blood froze. "What do you mean?" "My father is a lawyer. He worked on the case. Your case, 4 years ago. I recognized your name." I pulled my hand back, ready to get up and run. He continued quickly. "Wait, please. I haven't told anyone. Would never tell. I just wanted you to know that I admire you. The courage it must have taken to move forward after everything." I was paralyzed, not knowing how to react. Part of me wanted to flee, hide from the exposure. Another part felt a strange relief, as if a weight had been lifted by not having to pretend anymore, at least with one person. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice barely coming out. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you," he responded simply. And I wanted to start with total honesty. It was the beginning of my first relationship. Slow, hesitant, full of retreats on my part. Carlos had infinite patience, never pressuring me, always respecting my limits, even when he didn't completely understand them. It took me 6 months to let him kiss me, almost a year to be able to be alone in a closed room with him without panicking. When I finally told my father about Carlos, he was visibly nervous. The idea of seeing me involved with someone brought back fears of what had happened with Bernard. I invited Carlos for dinner, and my father interrogated him like only a police officer knows how. Carlos endured it all with respect and even humor, understanding where the concern came from. At the end of the night, when Carlos left, my father hugged me. "He seems like a good young man, Jan," he said, his voice choked. "Your mother would have liked him." It was the first time he mentioned my mother without that shadow of guilt and absolute pain. A small miracle. I graduated in 1974 at 23 years old. Carlos graduated in law the same year. Our relationship had strengthened, surviving the pressures of college, my internal struggles, my father's fears. At graduation, with the diploma in hand, I looked at the audience and saw my father applauding, standing up, tears in his eyes. Beside him was Susan, who had become a teacher, and a few more dear friends we had made over the years. It was at that moment I realized something important. We had built a new life. Not perfect, not without pain or scars, but a life with genuine connections, real achievements, moments of true joy. Carlos proposed to me that night, during the graduation party. I said yes, but with one condition, that we live near my father. He understood without me needing to explain. My father had improved a lot, but still needed us nearby, and I couldn't be happy knowing he was alone. We married in 1975, a small ceremony with only close friends and family. My father walked me down the aisle, thinner and with much more gray hair than he should have had at 50, but with a genuine smile on his face. When he handed me to Carlos, he whispered, "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." We bought a house 10 minutes from his. Carlos opened a small law office specializing in human rights. I began working at a community clinic, serving people who couldn't afford private therapy. The work was challenging, often painful, but deeply rewarding. Using my own trauma experience to help others navigate theirs gave meaning to everything that had happened. In 1977, at 26, I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a complex mixture of emotions. Joy, yes, but also terror. How could I be a mother when I had lost mine so young? How would I protect this child in a world that had shown itself to be so brutal? Dr. Edward, now more a friend than therapist, helped me navigate these fears. "You're not condemned to repeat the past, Janet," he reminded me. "Your experience has given you wisdom that many parents will never have." My father was ecstatic with the news. Something in him rejuvenated with the prospect of being a grandfather. He painted the baby's room, assembled the crib, started buying toys months before birth. "Do you think I'll know how to be a grandfather?" he asked me one night, insecurity showing through. "After everything? You'll be the best grandfather in the world," I replied, holding his hand. "This child will be so lucky to have you." In September 1977, my daughter Mary was born, a name chosen in honor of my mother. Holding that small bundle in my arms was like feeling my heart outside my body, exposed and vulnerable, but also incredibly strong. The love I felt was so overwhelming, it left me breathless. The first year with Mary was exhausting, scary, and wonderful. Carlos proved to be a dedicated father, sharing all responsibilities. My father appeared almost daily, bringing gifts, offering help, just wanting to hold his little granddaughter for a few minutes. Mary grew up surrounded by love, protected but not suffocated. We decided early on that, when she was old enough, we would tell her about what happened to our family. Not all the dark details, but the essential, that her grandmother had been a victim of violence, that her grandfather and I had survived a great tragedy. We wanted her to understand her roots, but without carrying our traumas. In 1980, we had our second child, Walter, honoring my father. Seeing the two grandchildren together, my father with a grandchild in each arm, was an image I never imagined possible in the darkest days after the tragedy. Life followed its course. We had joys, the children's first words, birthdays, graduations. We had sorrows too. My father's death in 1995 from a heart attack, at 70 years old. But even in losses, there was a fundamental difference. We were no longer alone, shattered by tragedy. We had built a family, a support network, a full life, despite everything. Mary graduated in medicine, Walter in engineering. Both married, gave me wonderful grandchildren. Carlos and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary last year. Half a century of partnership, respect, and a love that grew from the ashes of the greatest tragedy anyone can imagine. Today, at 73 years old, sitting in this room talking to you all, I look back and see that my life wasn't defined by what I lost, but by what I built afterward. I'm not just the girl who survived horror. I'm a woman who found strength where she thought there was none, who learned to love when she thought her heart was permanently broken. If there's a lesson I can share from my journey, it's this: trauma doesn't have the power to determine who you'll be forever. Yes, it leaves scars. Yes, it changes you fundamentally, but it doesn't determine the value of your life, nor limit your capacity to find joy, purpose, and love again. My story isn't about tragedy. It's about what came after: the reconstruction, the healing, the discovery that we are much more resilient than we imagine. It's about how, even in the darkest nights, there exists the possibility of dawn. If you're going through your own valley of shadows now, I want you to know, you're not alone. There's a path through pain, even when it seems impossible to see it. One step at a time, one day at a time. And maybe, years later, you'll look back like I'm doing now and see that you built something beautiful from the ruins. My dear ones, if this story touched your heart, it would make me very happy if you left a like on this video and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. This place here has become my little corner to share not only my experiences, but also to connect with people like you. And remember, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It warms my heart to know my words reach so many different places across America. Remember, our scars tell stories of survival, not just pain, and sharing them can be the first step in someone's healing who is suffering in silence. Until the next video, my dear ones, may God bless each one of you.